Okay, so I promised to go over this chapter 8 sheet with you through a tutorial. I'm going to go through it pretty quick and write things down as I go, and I'll try to type it as I go as well. The first question says, is the synthesis of glucose endergonic or exergonic? Synthesis is always endergonic, so I'm going to say endergonic. And the energy that's required there comes from the sun. So there isn't an exergonic reaction, so to speak, exactly that provides the energy. The sun provides the energy. The balanced summary equation that we did in class, we said 6 CO2 plus 12 H2O plus sunlight yields 1 glucose, so C6 H12O6. That's not great. C6 H12O6 plus 6 H2O and 6 oxygen. All right. You probably have that already written in. It's in the PowerPoint. Okay, what's the ultimate source of energy? This really kind of goes with question number 1. Of course, it's the sunlight. Name the 2 stages of photosynthesis. The first stage is called light dependent, or sometimes called the light reactions, light dependent reactions. It's fine. And then the other stage, we usually call the Calvin cycle, but it can also be called light independent. Sometimes it's called the carbon fixation reactions. Sometimes it's called the dark reactions. But we're going to use these two, Calvin cycle or light independent reactions. What is the significance of each stage? For the light dependent reactions, it is the production, the energy from sunlight is transferred to ATP and NADPH. And you may remember it was 18 ATPs and 12 NADPHs, although I don't get too stuck on the numbers. And then in the Calvin cycle, we're going to see that the ATP, the 18 ATP and 12 NADPH are used, the reactants, to generate glucose from carbon dioxide. So the energy and electrons from the light reactions are used to generate glucose in the Calvin cycle. All right, so the stages chart here, let's just do light dependent reactions occur at the thylakoid membranes. The Calvin cycle occurs in the stroma. Reactants for the light dependent reactions would be ADP and PI, which would be 18, I guess, if we want to get picky. And the products would be 18 ATP. We also have 12 NADP plus, which becomes 12 NADPH. And the electrons that are transferred are coming from water. And the water, generates a byproduct of 6 oxygen. So the water molecules are the source of electrons for the electron transport chain, and those electrons ultimately end up being carried by NADP+, which becomes NADPH when it is carrying those electrons. In the Calvin cycle, the 18 ATPs that we just made and the 12 NADPHs that we just made get used up, so they get converted back to 18 ATPs and 18 PIs. And 12 NADPHs end up as 12 NADP pluses. And that's all in order to convert 6 CO2s to 1 glucose. Although really it's initially 2 molecules called G3P, which is a 2-carbon sugar. And then that is joined together to make 1 glucose. So there's a little bit of a side note there. 2 3-carbon sugars makes 1 glucose ultimately. What are the components of a photosystem? It's a group of pigment molecules. And remember what pigment molecules are on the thylakoid membrane, bound into the thylakoid membrane, but with the porphyrin ring facing up to catch the sunlight. So this is like hundreds of pigment molecules in a grouping, a lot of chlorophylls, and then some of those other kinds of pigments, plus 1 or 2 what we call reaction center chlorophylls. And those are the special chlorophylls that can split water. And we split water to get electrons. And the electrons get activated or combined with the sun energy to then be passed down the electron transport chain. Photosystems 1 and 2 are adjacent to each other physically on the thylakoid membrane. And there's lots of these, not just one, but every time you have, it's actually photosystem 2, it occurs first in the chronological sequence, and then photosystem 1. So the electrons first go through photosystem 2, then they're recharged and they go through photosystem 1. They're adjacent to each other on the membrane, on the thylakoid membrane. Okay, I think that's good enough. But ultimately, the end product is those 18 ATPs and those 12 NADPHs. A chlorophyll molecule has what we call the porphyrin head. And this is the part that absorbs the sunlight, absorbs the photon of energy. And then we have the hydrophobic tail, just one tail, which anchors, we usually say anchors the pigment molecule into the thylakoid membrane. Regarding the splitting of water, when does this occur? It occurs at the reaction center chlorophyll, which is part of the photosystem, chlorophyll, and it occurs when light energy is passed to the reaction center chlorophyll, RCC. I should write that out. That's very lazy. Okay, who needs another acronym? Reaction center chlorophyll. And the electrons from the water molecule are extracted from the water to be energized by the photons, and then they will be passed down the electron transport chain, and that's all part of the process to make ATP. The acceptor for those electrons is NADP+, it becomes NADPH. In the Calvin cycle, the first step involves the addition of carbon dioxide to a 5-carbon sugar called RuBP. What is the name of the enzyme that catalyzes this step? Rubisco. Now, when I write it that way, it's kind of silly, but Ru is for ribulose, bis is for bisphosphate, and then CO is carboxylase oxidase. So that's the enzyme that can actually fix carbon into an organic compound. Initially, it's called RuBP, but it'll get changed and rearranged into G3P, and two G3Ps will be joined together to make one glucose. Okay, let's label the parts of the chloroplast. I'm just going to speak this out. On 13, A is the stroma, B is the outer membrane, C is the inner membrane, D is the thylakoid space or thylakoid lumen, and E is the thylakoid or thylakoid membrane. 14, what is photosynthesis? Photosynthesis is the process by which energy from sunlight is transferred and transformed into energy in the bonds of organic compounds such as glucose. Once an organism makes glucose, then that structure can be modified to make all the other organic compounds, which is really what biochemistry involves, is the conversion of one organic compound into another. All right, so we have the answer key. I hope you've enjoyed that. Fill that in and study.